Welcome, everybody, to our election special for Quaker Libertarians. This is what is it, October? No, it's not October anymore. It's November 1st, 2020, and we're gearing up for election, which is coming up in mere hours at this point, right? Later this week, we're going to talk over what our obligations are related to election time and have some good conversation. So once again, Juliet Nail and Jared Warner are with me for conversation. Let's take a moment to settle down before we begin. Thank you. All right, I'm gonna stop share. And I noticed on the last video that I was looking off into the distance, and I don't know if I thought I was trying to appear thoughtful or what I was doing, but I'm gonna make an effort to look at the screen, and hopefully that will be conveyed to everybody that you have my full attention. And I'm hoping we figured out how to have gallery view for the recording, which has been the bane of these videos up to now. So this could be a groundbreaking, path-breaking Quaker Libertarian video like you've never seen before.
We can only hope.
Okay. So in good Quaker fashion, our hope for today was to spend some time talking about Quaker Query. And you can see behind me, that's Lucy. She's my wife's classroom skeleton for teaching high school science. So don't be disturbed. There are skeletons in the back. Jared, so you have a process that you work with in your meeting, working through queries, and thought there might be one that would be relevant for election time. Is that right?
Yeah. In the Friends or Quaker manner of worship, I guess, one of the disciplines that has emerged from that is asking queries, which are deep questions that you have to contemplate and center down on and to basically see a checklist of if you're where you would like to be. And in our yearly meeting or group of churches or meetings, we have 10 queries, and one of them deals with participating in the government system wherever you are. So the one that I'll go ahead and share it if you'd like. And what I do at our meeting is we'll go through these every couple of months. We'll go through one query and discuss it and as a meeting and see where we are and try to determine if we are actually living it out. Last week we talked about, our purpose is to live our faith out or what we believe out every day in our lives. And that's kind of what the queries are supposed to help us do. So any questions on that, or did I explain that fairly well?
You know what? We may just have to live it.
We might have to. That's probably the best thing. All right, I'm going to share the query here. So the query that deals with kind of this week, since it's election week, is in Mid-America yearly meeting. We have 10 queries, like I said, and the 9th one deals with governance and that sort of thing. So the query is, do you exercise your rights and duties as a citizen to vote, to fulfill jury duty, and in other ways to bring Christian influence in all levels of government? And then in our yearly meeting, we also attach that with scripture, and I'm just able to share this one screen. There we go. And the scripture attached to this one is actually Romans 13:7, but I usually add in the verses around so that we get a little bit of the context. So you want me to go ahead and read it, Matt, or
That would
just
be
leave it up there? Okay. Romans 13, 1 through 7. And we talked a little bit about this a couple weeks ago. And this is just a little more thorough into it, I guess. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those authorities that exist have been entrusted by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Do you wish to have no fear of authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive its approval. For it is God's servant, for it is God's servant for your good. But if you do what is wrong, you should be afraid, for the authority does not bear the sword in vain. It is the servant of God to execute wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore, one must be subject not only because of wrath, but also because of conscience. For the same reason, you also pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants, busy with this very thing. Pay to all what is due them. Taxes to whom taxes are due, revenue to whom revenue is due, respect to whom respect is due, honor to whom honor is due. That's the verses anyway.
Okay, so just for our instruction, how does this typically play out in your meeting? You have a process of going through these and working with them in conversation with them.
Well, what we generally do is I'll read the query and the scripture attached to it, and then we would tend to have a time of centered worship. And then I'd ask, basically work through the query one question at a time and ask, how are you living this out? So that's generally how we do things at our meeting. And you would think that for such a short little query thing, it wouldn't take very long to get through, but there's about 15 people that come to those discussions usually, and they fill up at least 45 minutes of discussion, which is quite crazy if you ask me. So so the first part of that query is, do you exercise your rights and duties as a citizen to vote? And that's where we're at right now. And I recently had a post on one of my sermons online about this very type of thing, and somebody said that they have a hard time wanting to vote because they realize that no matter who they vote for in the two-party system, they both support violence as a way to promote governance. So, and that's it's an important thing to consider. So I don't want to take up all the time talking because, but do you have anything else that you want to add to that first phrase of that query?
Well, I can jump in here. That's my starting point. Not necessarily from a Quaker perspective, but certainly in my libertarian journey. And I know, Matt, I think you and I have talked about this, if we're, and probably Jared too, if we're saying that that government by definition is a monopoly of violence. So if we're voting for condoning that system, then we're condoning that system. So that's my starting point. I know we talked about this Romans 13 last week or 2 weeks ago. So I'm interested in you pulling that in. But anyway, that's my starting point. That's all. And so I'm interested in, maybe I'm wrong. I'm open to I'm wrong.
Well, I think there's a lot to unpack in the Romans 13 piece in there. Some of the links that we put in the last video have some good material on in interpretation about that. But if we're specifically asking about voting as this first component of the query, I think you're onto something, Juliet, and I think that question of one, just being acknowledging that voting is not an inherently perfect option. Right? It's complicated. It does involve you in systems of oppression, no matter who you're voting for, and to be at least be aware of it and have given that some thought, I think is really critical, because there's so much sort of civic boosterism and really public pressure, not only to vote, but to announce your vote, to get other people to vote, all that kind of thing. And the sort of basic question of where is your primary citizenship, and for many, they would say the United States, right? Or whatever country they happen to be in. And for anybody who holds to Christian faith, that question should be at least in your mind of where is your primary allegiance. And if you're participating in the system, then you are a participant in all of what is implied there. Now, we just posted a post on Facebook and on our blog that sort of raised that question from an anarchist standpoint, and saying you can't sully yourself at all by participation in an election, because by so doing you are giving a blanket endorsement to everything that comes afterwards. And for me, at least, I think this query is helpful because it brings to mind that it isn't a simple choice, that I should be thinking about the implications, but it doesn't always come out cleanly one way or the other. I tend to default to I'm going to cast my vote such that it's reducing harm as much as possible, and at least as I understand it, and reducing violence, that case. But that's an easy thing to dismiss as well. You're voting for the lesser of three evils, right? That kind of thing. So I don't know to what extent that either of you have thought about this, or have thoughts along the lines of voting.
Well, I think voting is just one of the aspects in the query.
Mm-hmm.
If you read the full one, there's more to participating in our society than just voting. That's what everybody talks about, especially this year.
Yeah.
The second part is to fulfill jury duty. That one's a tough one too, because if you are registered to vote, then you are also put on jury duty lists and that sort of thing. And I've just spent the last 6 months on call basically for jury duty because my name came up on their list. So, and every week I have to call into the courthouse and see if I have to go to the courthouse or not. And for 6 months, that's kind of annoying, but it's part of our culture, I guess. But the last one is in other ways to bring Christian influence in all levels of government. That's where I think the question really is lying, because if we only vote, then, and that's all that we participate in, if that's the extent of our conversation, then we are putting a blanket, whatever happens, then I'm part of that problem. But if we're doing other things along with that vote to promote our what we believe to be true and bring that into the conversation, then that's where I think we need to be focused on. And how are we doing that as citizens of the United States, as people of Quaker persuasion, or just as human beings? And that part doesn't even matter where you live, because are you trying to do whatever you can to bring the influence that you live your life by? Are you showing that and living that and promoting that in your community?
Yeah. So just to recount, we're based on this query, we're talking about voting, jury duty, and Christian influence within all levels of government.
Yes. Yeah, that's the 3 points in that particular query. So the thing about that third part, though, is we think only of government as government. Like, I live in Kansas City, so the level of government here would be the city government. How am I bringing a Christian influence or Quaker influence into the city government? But there's more to government than just that. Every corporation has a system of rules and codes of conduct, so to speak. And I work security at a corporation in retail, so I'm a technically law enforcer of those codes of conduct in that particular place. So am I bringing a Christian influence even to that aspect of where I work, where I in the homeowners association or student government in schools or anything like that? Are we promoting things of faith in all aspects of our life?
Mm-hmm.
I brought that up in our last query discussion, and everybody thought what corporate law is, or what you're doing inside a corporation has nothing to do with it, but it kind of does. Because corporations have invested in the elections as well. So I grew up in Kansas, and everybody knows the Koch brothers in Kansas, and they've invested a lot. So
yeah.
So corporations do have some influence, as well as churches and other communities.
Well, and I think, so when I look at that query, and our meeting is a program meeting, and yes, we do queries, and every Quaker meeting that I've been involved with over the last 30 years does queries as well. And I like this one because I was really focused on the election, and coming from the viewpoint that Matt points out, I don't really want to focus on that. That's not the biggest place that I can have influence. Now, do I vote sometimes? Absolutely. But can I have a bigger influence, a bigger impact by how I live my life? The example of I actually think, so we live on a very small lot it's a first ring suburb. So we have the square grids, the rectangles. And we didn't have room for our garden in the back. So my garden's in the front. And oddly, when you spend a lot of time in your front yard, people talk to you. So having my garden in the front yard has turned out to be community building, right? And just talking to people in the neighborhood and encouraging each other. We were just talking to friends down the street, who also have one car and they commute by their bike, or, creating community and solutions, and kind of having positive peer pressure on each other to live life. In this case, I guess I'm talking about simplicity, right? The values of simplicity. I might have a bigger impact by just doing that. Maybe, I don't know.
Well, I mean, others have brought this question up about elections that, they only happen every 2-4 years for some offices. And can you even reasonably expect to be saying, I endorse everything this person is going to do every between now and 2 to 4 years from now? You sit and so is what's and that, if that's the only real check on their authority in the meantime, then that's problematic. But I think like you, I vote, and sometimes I don't feel led to vote if I don't really know enough about the candidates involved. but I haven't taken a stance against voting, which, I think there is that element among friends and, others of basically sort of withdrawal from politics because it is complicated morally. And on the other end, there's like Friends Committee on National Legislation and that will say, okay, we're part of the system. These people are in office. We don't just have elections. We can train each other and engage with these people over the course of their terms such that we can try to influence what they're doing at that level on a more regular basis. And then to your point, what are we doing locally? What are we doing in our neighborhoods and communities such that we're trying to sort of shift the needle? And it's probably not one or the other. It's probably some combination of ways we go about this. And it may be that some people are called to work in one area more than another. So it's complicated. I guess it's the short answer, at least from my perspective. But
it is very complicated, and yeah, I mean, Kansas City, Missouri's show me state, so they're always in one of these. They're always involved in the elections, no matter what. And a lot of the people that I interact with are you have to vote. There's no other option. You have to support somebody. And then they'll also say, well, you can't vote for a third party because then you're just throwing your vote away. So, and I kind of stop and think, I'm like, but you're perpetuating a system that you already know is broken. And if your entire stance is you have to vote for the lesser of two evils, you're still voting for evil. and that's kind of part of what I have said in my community is, yeah, I'm going to vote for a third party personally. And they're like, well, you're just throwing your vote away and you might get somebody worse than what you think. I was like, but if 10% of Missouri were to vote for somebody other than the two parties, then those two parties would have to try to figure out how they can gain that 10%. Yeah. So I think there is something to that the voting aspect that we can do, but you also have to do a little bit more, because if you don't have that conversation with somebody of why you're doing what you're doing, and I think it was last week I talked about somebody that I worked with got upset with me because I wasn't trying to convert him to my manner of believing. And I said that it wasn't my job. So, and then he got mad. He's like, well, you're a pastor. That is your job. What else would your job be? And I said, well, I'm just supposed to live my life in front of you so that you can see that there might be a different way, and choose whether or not to do that on your own. Same thing goes with governments and elections and that sort of thing. If we can't present something different, then there is something different. So how come we can't present that and encourage that?
If the fundamental question of this query is, what does it mean to be a good citizen? And we think about that through the lens of Romans 13, which is, trotted out all over the place about, basically, it's often used as obey your leaders, right? But if we think about the context of that, where we know, look, Paul is somebody who escaped jail on multiple occasions. So on the one, it can't just mean I'm going to obey whatever anybody says to me, because there are times when we wouldn't obey, right? And it doesn't mean that you just take whatever is going to be thrown at you. I think the biblical scripture does not give us a clear just obey no matter what, because that the people we look up to in scripture did not always do that. So I guess back to, it's complicated, and if somebody's going to use Romans 13 or a query like this is basically a clobber to don't ever ask any questions, that's not appropriate.
And Yeah, it shouldn't be used to clobber everything. I mean, just do what you're told, because there are times that we do have to speak out and resist, and we have to resist knowing that there are consequences. And today I brought up the book, The Friendly Persuasion, and there's a discussion between the father and the son in that book about joining the forces to fight in the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
And he asks, and the son says, I'm willing to die for what I believe in. And the dad's saying, yeah, that's great, but are you willing to kill for what you believe in?
Yeah.
And that's something that really struck me as a younger individual at the time that I read that. Is what I'm debating with others around me something that's so important that it would drive that type of wedge between us? And if it isn't, then why are we arguing so deeply about it? Why can't we figure out a different way to approach the issue? And I said before, I work security in retail, and with the whole pandemic stuff going on, I get people up in my face about whether to wear a mask or not to wear a mask. I get both sides. So if somebody comes in without a mask and I ask them to put one on, they yell at me. If somebody comes in and doesn't have a mask on, then the people wanting to wear masks start yelling at me. So it's like, hey guys, social distance. But it's just one of those things where, is this mask something that you really want to potentially force somebody or take somebody's life over? And there's a broader debate on, well, they could be infecting somebody, but if I were to call the police, there's going to be at least a confrontation, and that could potentially lead to something more. Is the 10 minutes that person's going to be in the store worth the potential of life lost? And that's something that we have to kind of think about and deal with, and and weigh as human beings. And I think that's a lot of what that verse of submitting to authority is yeah, they have the power and the monopoly to use force, but are we going to let them use that force on us, or are we going to, when it gets to that point where they're going to use force, are we going to step back and at that point stop resisting?
Well, Jared, I think if I remember last week, you said that when Paul wrote this particular passage, he was in jail.
Yes.
Or
Yeah.
2 weeks ago. And that when I think we discussed it at that time, we talked about how you're always subject to government, but divine authority is always going to trump or be, so to speak, or be more important than following human authority, right?
Right.
So we have to know that if we're going to push up against human authority, we may be subject to jail. We may be subject to, even up to and including death, right? So I appreciate that reminder. But then, even though we don't see in that passage that the passage itself doesn't say divine authority is more important, but that's everywhere in the Bible. That's
Right.
everywhere in all of, not just Christian tradition, almost every tradition of divine authority is more important than human authority. So I really appreciate that perspective and how you're doing that with your people that are pushing against you on both sides.
Yeah.
That's a tough one.
And you've seen videos on YouTube of the confrontations that people have had. We don't have those in where I'm at, because I approach it in a very graceful manner, I guess. Like, okay, you don't want to wear a mask, there's one available for you if you want it. If not, then also on the other side, I can't force somebody to wear a mask. It is their life, and if you have a problem with it, stay away from them. So it's just it's one of those things. I'm not willing to pursue any farther because that's not very. It's not very nice for one thing. So, and there is an aspect of that divine trust, divine authority on verse 5 of Romans 13. Therefore, one must be subject not only because of wrath, but also because of conscience.
Mm.
So, we have to be aware of our conscience as well. And can you rightfully say one thing and act another way? And that's you're not being true to your word if you act one way and speak another. So, and that's part of what I try to encourage in my life, as well as encourage others to live, is be true to who you say you are. Because if you're living a lie, then you're living a lie. You're not helping yourself or anyone else. So, but
Well, we're drawing to the end of our half hour together. Any words of wisdom, if people haven't already voted, what they should do as they head to the polls?
you want us to say go out and vote? Is that what
My
you're going to
thing
say? Go ahead.
So I'm not going to say go and vote. I'm not going to say don't vote, but I will say what you said, follow your conscience, do that query, examine that conscience, and then you decide for this election, does what best aligns with who you really are.
Yeah.
And I think that is incredibly wise advice, because, if you aren't true, if you're not voting for who best represents you, then what's the point of voting? If no one represents you, then nobody should get your vote because they don't represent you. So, and just to the last verse in verse 7 starts by saying, pay to all what is due them. Taxes to whom taxes are due, revenue to whom revenue is due, respect to who respect is due, honor to who honor is due. And that is the verse that the query is really based on. And I think that's one to think about, because if they don't deserve respect, don't give them respect. If they do have respect, then give them the respect and make sure you're supporting that. And if there is honor, give them the honor. If not, then don't give them the honor. And that goes with what Juliet was saying about, voting your conscience, doing what you think is voting for somebody that speaks and represents you. That's kind of what it is. You got to use your conscience and actually think it through. There's a lot more to everything than just what the two parties say, and there's a lot more than just what is shown on the news. And do some research. You got a couple of days yet to do some research if you want to.
Well, or not voting. I mean, I don't know if we're revealing what we're doing, but I have done, sometimes I vote, sometimes I don't vote. Depends on if I'm in alignment with my consciousness, right?
And that's part of it. There are some elections where nobody's worth voting for. So, and that's a viable option, because that is voicing you are still voicing what you feel by not voting. So
You can get out the vote or get out of the vote.
Get out of the vote, right.
All right, well, there you have it, folks. Wrap on our election special. We hope that you all give good thought to what you're going to do on Tuesday, if you haven't already, and go with your conscience.
thank you, Matt. Thank you, Juliet.
See you later, folks.
See ya.
Bye.
See ya. Thank you.